This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Dan Kramer worked at Atari from 1980 to 1984 in the Consumer Engineering Group, where he created products for the home computers and home video games. He championed the creation of the Trak-Ball accessories for the Atari game consoles and computers, and received a patent for his digital-to-analog interface for the Atari 5200 Trak-Ball. Dan also worked on the French SECAM version of the Atari XL computers, the Atari 2700, and various other projects. This interview took place on December 18th, 2020.
Well, I was an English major during high school and the first round of college, but I soured on it and bailed out. That was spring of 1970. My mom was beside herself, so I went back to college at the newly built West Valley Junior College, which was a mile from my house. Used to ride my 10-speed because a friend had wrecked my car. And I decided I would take an electronics intro course, and it just all clicked into place. It was like, I can do this. So I enrolled in their degree program and went for another year at West Valley, and then I moved up to Humboldt County and lived in the Arcata Hotel for a year to complete my degree.
Really? I lived in Arcata and Blue Lake for more than 20 years.
Oh, I was in room 209 at the Arcata Hotel.
Huh. While you went to HSU?
No, I went down to the College of the Redwoods, south of Eureka.
Uh-huh.
And I couldn't even find a place to live except for the hotel. It was, everybody knew everybody, and it was all sewn up before the school year. I went up there in like the middle of the summer and I still couldn't get a room to rent. So the hotel turned out to be a good deal. Well, when I had my degree in hand, I moved back in my old bedroom again at home and started job hunting and got hired to International Video Corporation, known as IVC. They were making reel-to-reel videotape recorders and color cameras. So I spent a couple of years there troubleshooting circuit boards and learning how the systems worked. And then followed my tech supervisor over to the next company, which was Airtech, A-E-R-T-E-C-H. And they made defense electronics and a lot of microwave radiometer type of products. I worked on high-speed video amplifiers. Got bored after 2 years, but sadly I was there for 5 years. So I started looking around, and during that time, which would be about 1977-ish, 78-ish, I applied to Atari twice, but did not make any headroom. They never contacted me. And I was pretty bummed out by the summer of 1980. So I had a dialogue with Jim Tolbert, who was an old school coin-op guy from Berkeley. And he was really well connected. He knew a lot of people in the industry of entertainment electronics. And he said, you should go back to Atari's personnel department, pound your fist on the table, and demand an interview, which was what I hadn't had the frame of mind to do. So with his advice, I went back there and got an instant interview and spilled my mouth out for about a half an hour. And the guy that hired me was Rich something or other, who eventually ended up heading the HR department. And he said, well, I don't know if they have any openings for pinball, because that was my big interest, but I'll just send your resume around and see what happens. So a week later, I got notified I had an interview lined up with the Consumer Electronics Department, and that was in the upstairs of 1272 Borregas. Turns out I was interviewed by Don White because Dan Corona, the boss of the department, was off on his sabbatical. After 7 years of continuous employment at Atari, you got your regular 3 weeks of vacation plus a 7-week sabbatical, so 10 weeks all at once. And Dan Corona was just finishing that off, so I was invited to a pool party at his house to meet the guy that never hired me, who became my boss. So it was quite a surprise for him. Yeah, they were starting to ramp up and put more personnel into the department for tech support and engineers. So I started there in August of '80. There were about at least 5 or 6 engineers and likewise tech support. My first job was to characterize 810 disk drives inside a building that was otherwise derelict. So we just had this great big room full of disk drives and 40-column printers spitting out data, trying to figure out why they were having trouble. The problem was they were too analog oriented and they needed to have more digital preparation of the signal. So they eventually got that squared away. And usually there were more than one assignments in support activities. So I had stuff for component characterization, working on the disk drives, working on learning everything around me, because there was about 20 workbenches with gear, and most of the setups were being used by somebody else. But eventually I had my own cubicle and my own workbench, and this brought me up to about near the end of 1980, and there was a coin-operated Asteroids machine in one little side room, and anybody that wanted to would go over and play it, breaking rocks as they called it. And I tried it and did not really feel the love. But then they put in another arcade release called Missile Command, which had the big black Trak-Ball. I wasn't too good at it, but it sucked me in, and I watched a lot of other people doing what I wished I could, playing this game with the big Trak-Ball. And by that time, they had turned out a miniature Trak-Ball with the white ball that was used in the cabaret and cocktail versions of Missile Command. And somebody in the software group turned out an arcade simulation of Missile Command for the 800 computer. And if you zip-locked or zip-tied a cherry switch onto one side of the little assembly and ran it into the fire button, you could play Missile Command with one base for free. So it became a big rage in the lab for a number of weeks. And after that, most people just went back to their main interests, which was whatever else was going on. And I couldn't get trackballs out of my head, so I spent about, a good number of weeks trying to improve its performance. There were notable problems with the slotted wheels that they used for the optical encoders on the trackball assembly. I discovered they were using older components for the encoder's optical channel was curved because the original large trackball had a curved type slotted assembly. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to make this thing not lose control by spinning the ball too hard, because it would lose direction and then you were in the dirt. So I promoted to the component engineer that we get a project going to come up with a straight channeled optical encoder that we could use. And I spent a lot of effort on creating slotted encoder wheels from PC board film, and we put those in place of the old school component. And I managed to improve the performance so that you could never lose direction on the trackball. Now, there wasn't any kind of real project for trackball that was an official project. It was actually just an idea in the background, and then
something you're doing in your spare time after you did your real work?
Yeah, it was unassigned. It was just what I do, and I would just stay there late if I wanted to. I only lived about 3 miles from the engineering building. Mm-hmm. So I probably spent a couple of months doing things that weren't frowned upon, because everybody in that department was playing games all day long, every day. And it just sort of like fit right in. But then they wanted to put out their new generation game system called the 5200, which was an 800 computer without a keyboard, because everybody was buying those. The public was buying those computers to play games on as much as they were to learn how to program BASIC and other types of stuff. It became a game machine for people who wanted to spend about $1,000. And I got notified one day that we are making an official game system, but we don't have many accessories for it. What's with that trackball thingy you got going? Can you do that with an analog kind of performance? Because everything at output were digital streams of data. So I started back to the drawing board and spent a lot of time working on my digital to analog conversion for shaft encoders, which was the name of the patent that they gave me eventually. So most of the communication that came filtering down to me was not always engineering related. It was about what is happening with the product promotion and marketing. And they showed me a couple of appearance models made by the industrial design and mechanical engineering groups. And they said, these are going to be passed around different departments and make a final decision. Is it going to be a product that has a trackball and one set of buttons for right-handed people to play, or this larger one that has a symmetry down the middle with a trackball in the middle and twin keypads, twin pairs of fire buttons, but it's probably going to be the cheap one.
The smaller, cheaper one.
Yeah, the smaller, cheaper one.
Why did you prefer the larger one? Are you left-handed?
No, but I read letters to the fledgling video game magazines from people who were left-handed, and they just had enough problem trying to play a 2600 joystick, which had a red fire button in the upper corner that favored right-handed. I mean, if you knew what you were doing, you could rewire it, but that was not for the general public. So I did what any sneaky guy would do. I wrapped both of the trackball models into a towel, smuggled them home, and stared at them for a day or two, and only showed them to a couple of my compadres in the department. And I was sort of whining about, yeah, it's not going to be the one I really want. And they said, well, why don't you just hide the single-sided one and make the other one operational, because it didn't have any working guts in it. It had no mechanism inside. The ball was glued in, but it had enough interior space, and I'd already created prototype circuit boards. We had a little etching room in the department. So I had a stroke of genius and built working guts over the weekend and put them into the two-sided model. And there were surprises all around the following Monday or Tuesday when they had the department meeting, and we brought in a TV and a 5200 prototype pilot unit console and my two-sided trackball model. It was the only one in the world at the time. There's the single-sided one.
Nice. Pretty.
It bears a lot of similarity, not everything. And also in the corner that has the keypad, the lower two corners have little buttons that say Atari in red and green. That's the sign of a true 5200 prototype, because they didn't put the yellow hashtag and at sign, I think it was, in the corners. This has a title strip that's made out of, I think it's an aluminum band with laser etching for the lettering and numbers. So see, not exactly everything that
It's pretty, and it's like you said, it's small. Unlike the one that was released that you prefer, which is size of a small car.
Size of a small console.
Yeah,
And here it is.
there it is.
And
So
I
is
took
this the
it.
one that you
Yes.
modified?
Yes, it's operational.
Uh-huh.
All the buttons have micro switches under them. The keyboards are set up. And of course, the start, pause, and select. We actually took this to a trade show when I first debuted it at the CES. People pounded away on it, and it never died. As far as I know, it's still operational. I haven't fired it up in a number of years.
So you took this thing to a meeting where they weren't expecting a working prototype.
Exactly.
And obviously it was a hit.
Yeah, there was a little bit of protest from marketing and sales, but the writing was on the wall, and chalk up a minor victory. Now, this console was already being sold in stores. The Trak-Ball trailed it by a few months.
Mm-hmm.
And when it got into the marketplace, it was being sold at toy stores and Sears and so on. I believe the console was $300 and the Trak-Ball was about $59. But people were buying them. My best guess is that they made a couple 100,000 of them.
Nice. Did you get a royalty off of any of these, or was it just you did the work and you're done?
Indirectly, I got a patent for the technology to convert the pulse streams to analog for the paddle inputs. That was a total of $2,000, but they would not hand out royalties. I don't think that was how their heads worked.
Sure. So what were you supposed to be doing? What was your real work during this time when you were doing the fun Trak-Ball stuff on the side? Was it still
no, there was another product. See, they kept endlessly repackaging the 2600 because it was still a what do you call it? Golden goose.
Right.
Those eggs kept on coming.
Mm-hmm.
So they repackaged it for Sears. It used to be called the Telegames, I think. And they called it the 2800 in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And then they called it, its Telegames name. And I was the secondary engineering on that product. And when they got new plastics made, which is a really sweet looking machine, I was the one that built it up and put working electronics in it and gave feedback for improvements and fixes and stuff. And the very first one of those that was handed to me had a nameplate stuck in the top center that should have said Atari 2800, but whoever commissioned the label didn't get that you don't use the CX prefix except like on the box or in the paperwork. So I still have my old number one 2800 and the label plate says CX 2800. It's the only one because I notified the graphics group that was an incorrect labeling, so they did away with it. So I may have the only CX 2800 in existence. It's got 4 combo pilot controllers, and it has one controller that I created from a 2700 controller, which originally was wireless. But this is a wired one that has the same plastic brown body form that the 2700 controllers did.
So my first love is the Atari 8-bit computers. And in my research, it seemed like the Trak-Ball controller for the computer, 8-bit computers, in my reading, it seems like that was your baby and you wanted that to happen and it was all you. Is that true?
Which variety?
The XL type controller.
Oh, no, I didn't specifically work on all the controllers. Ultimately, I would have been doing more controller design, but that was before the end of things as we knew them.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the products I worked on were short-term. Once the 5200 Trak-Ball came out and was out the door, they said, we want to make a compact, small trackball that can be used with the 2600 or with the computer. And so the first one I did just had a single mode in it with a digital trackball performance similar to what works in the coin-op missile command. But they didn't follow up with a lot of product.
Games that would actually use that
games that
trackball.
would use it, yeah. And the very first trackball, as I mentioned, was only a joystick emulator. But then we put the second mode in and put a switch on the underside of the little trackball's console. So you could change from joystick emulator to regular trackball performance. And most of the trackballs that were made were with the kind with the two modes. So if you flash forward to the present day and you get one of those that has the two mode switch on it, there are games being put out by Atari Age that have twin mode performance and true trackball mode. And there are some new games, some hack games and originals coming out. There's even a new one for the 5200. All you have to do is go to Atari Age and look up their product line.
Yeah, they've got some great new stuff. I love that they're making new games and selling them commercially. I understand that someone at Atari was encouraging people to hack their trackball controllers to have 3 buttons so that there'd be a button for every base on Missile Command. And if you did that, you would get the extra double secret version of Missile Command that could handle it.
Basically true.
Yeah.
I don't know that I suggested it, but I used to go see Rob Zadibble, who programmed the 1 base version and the 3 base version. And he said, the computer is capable of running a 3 base version. It's just that there isn't a controller in existence unless you build one. I said, not a problem. So I created one that used the 2 paddle lines to ground each of those for the outer bases, and showed him the one that I built. You may have seen pictures of that online. There you go.
Nice.
There's probably 1 or 2 more of these somewhere that somebody went to the trouble to build, but I got all fancy schmancy about it. You can see the translucent, transparent orange plastic housing. I think I even put a diskette sleeve on the back side so that you could put the software on diskette into the back of the controller and carry it around.
Talk to me about the characterizing 810 drives that you started off the conversation with. Were these drives that had been returned, or were these drives that like pre-ship it, or are they still in prototype at this point?
Good question. I would presume that some were rejected or sent back from the public, when they found that their disk drive wasn't performing, and they went back and complained and maybe got to swap it for a different one.
So did you hook it up to an oscilloscope? How did you test these things?
There was an exercise routine on diskette that we used, and it ran the disk drive with endless exercising to try to get characteristic data that you could make some sense out of. But most of the problems were sort of nebulous. They didn't seem to have a pattern, but you had to discover that before knowing that it didn't have a pattern. So we had dozens and dozens of disk drives banging out data on a 40-column roll of paper, and we were supposed to read this off and pick it out, look for patterns, I think there were other things done to the disk drives that fixed the problem or fixed most of it. They called it a data separator. It was like an add-on board inside that made the data more squared up and digital looking to the electronics so that they were able to get proper performance out of the disk drives. But we got bored as hell. We were off in this little building down the street from our engineering department, and every day we had to come and check in and then go down to this, we called it the command post. I have some entries in my engineering notebook, but after a while I got bored with it. We did that for a couple of months, I think. But anything that was necessary to try to keep the product flow going was important. And the Atari computers were looked upon as the wave of the future. There was a lot of vibe about, there are so many games out, everybody's going to get tired of games. But it didn't happen during the first 3 years of the 80s. It just kept on going. People were spitting out money hand over fist, and they were competitors putting out third-party games that were selling well. So it had its own legs for quite a while. They tried to supplant it with the 5200, and it managed to make some dents, but people were just shy of a $300 console.
Right.
I'm thinking by this time the 2600 was down to maybe $149.
So you mentioned your engineering notebook. Was this, you're keeping a notebook when you were at Atari? Do you still have it? Have you scanned it? Is this something you've shared with the world?
Well, I usually just take it out and dig through it once in a while. Ta-da!
Oh, cool.
It's got a lot of stuff ear tagged. I
I'm
did go through and
looking at a 3-ring binder, maybe 2-inch binder filled with papers and a lot of Post-it notes tagging certain pages.
yeah, and I received this on October 2nd, 1980. At least that's when it was registered. And I filled it up about 2/3 of the way. I wrote a lot of information down that was in my engineering file folders, which also went home with me eventually, because everybody wanted to get the heck out of there starting in the 1983 zone.
Yeah.
And the biggest decision you had to make every week was, whose going away party are you going to? But I still kept on working away at it because I still had things that were interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even though I didn't do software coding in games, I worked a lot with test programs and went to great pains to meet people that were working more on the software side. Everybody was in the one big 2-story building in 1272 Borregas through, I think it was around September of 82. So I was there for about 2 years, and then they moved us to a building in San Jose, and they split up the departments. The coin-op division was downstairs. They went to Milpitas. The upstairs had already split off the software group because they were getting overcrowded. So they were compadres, but physically not in the same zone. But the first 2 years, it was really a hotbed. And there were certain programmers I got to know better because of the fact that I was always going to their department and handing off prototype Trak-Balls so that they could use them for 5200 games.
Mm-hmm.
And I just happened to have, I think I had 2 of them. Most of these I gave away, but this is a 3-mode Trak-Ball assembly that I built myself.
Okay, so I'm looking at a Trak-Ball grafted to a keyboard controller, grafted to 3 buttons for missile command, grafted to, I don't know what else is going on there.
You pretty much hit it. And take a look here at the back side of the circuit board. That's one that I laid out and designed and etched and hand built in the etching room
Hmm.
before there were circuit boards available with the same information that was on
So
the,
what is this monstrosity?
well, you could play 5200 games. You could play Missile Command on the computer, and you could play emulated games, joystick emulated games on the 2600.
Neat.
And I don't know where they all went to. That's the problem with prototypes. They don't come home usually.
Was that something that you were hoping might be a product of some sort, or were you just goofing around?
No, that was just an internal to see if I could do it, I think, and use it in different performance modes. But I didn't have any intention. I didn't talk to anybody about why don't we put this in some plastic.
Did you have any ideas for other types of controllers for the computers or for the game systems that
Oh,
you
yeah.
tried, or what other crazy, out there things did you want to do or think about?
Well, I was starting to communicate with General Computer, who are on the East Coast, and they wrote some of the good games for the 5200 and then the 7800. So I got a phone connection with a guy that was programming pole position for the 5200, and he put analog reading Trak-Ball code into the game so that you can play pole position on the 5200 using my Trak-Ball to steer. And then you can use the keypad for shifting gears.
Neat. So was there consideration of a steering wheel controller?
Probably. There were other styles of controller that I promoted that didn't get far enough because things were just falling apart. I had a coin-op Star Wars Yoke controller that I got out of stores. We had requisition forms, and you could fill it out for anything you wanted from any division or department, get it signed by your supervisor, and take it to the stock room, which was a drive across town. So I had a pole position control panel from a arcade pole position. I grafted that through the 5200 circuitry. And I did not get the one for the Star Wars game interfaced before everything just stopped being of concern. Everybody just wanted to get out of there. But I got some kind of black sheep stigma on me because I was working on XL versions of the 600 and 800 for the French SECAM video format. And most of my work on the SECAM XL 600, 800s was with Pete Gerard, who was the senior engineer. He was also senior on the 5200. Pete forgot more than anybody else could ever know.
So what was your work on the SECAM version?
Well, what I remember is that by this time we had moved to San Jose. So instead of having a cubicle with open top walls, we had our own little tiny lab. And there was still a focal central point for all the tech support staff to hang out in one group. But Pete requisitioned this closed wall room that was just labeled on the outside as SECAM only or something to that effect. And he and I would work on the interface performance of the SECAM using a big French TV that we had. And believe you me, it was a big TV. And also getting the grounding on the circuit board optimized so that it wouldn't have noise carrying on the ground, because we didn't have enough circuit board to have a ground plane, which is essential for good performance. So we had to do it all with ground traces on both sides of the board. Now, I have seen that the SECAM XL was built to some extent in France, but I wasn't involved in that part of it, so it's just hearsay from years ago that I've heard. I have some SECAM paperwork and parts lists and schematics, and somewhere buried in my storage I have a 600 XL SECAM complete and operational, and just, I think, blank circuit boards for the 800 XL SECAM. And that's probably why I was kept on board when everybody else got laid off in the summer of '84. So I had to stay on for a few more months, going crazy and wishing I was doing something else.
So you were working for the Trimels for a while, sounds like.
Yeah, but nobody ever came and told me what to do. But I had full access to a lot of the buildings and warehouses in Sunnyvale. And that means that I had to use the opportunity to look for components and parts and bring them back to the lab and use them to work on the SECAM XLs, which is how I found a lot of weird stuff not related to SECAM, like clear plastics for 7800 parts, stuff like that. And being the pack rat that I am, some of that stuff went home with me. But keep in mind that I've been supporting the Atari collector hobby for over 20 years, and so a great part of what I took home has gone into private collections or museums, like the National Video Game Museum in Frisco, Texas has a good number of prototype items that I brought to the table 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what I hung on to were near and dear to my own projects, which would be the 2800, the Trak-Balls, and the SECAM computers. There's probably a few other things that I liked the most that I hung on to, but you can't keep everything forever.
That's true, sadly. Can I ask how you came across why you still had the Cosmos holograms that you're selling on eBay?
Well, going to different buildings that had been hit by the layoff battalion meant that a lot of staff didn't really condense what they had in their work areas and take it with them. They just left it. So I was going through ghost towns for different departments, and I think that's where I found the Cosmos hologram. And I had a working, non-working test console, which was probably used for visual display, possibly at CES. But that Cosmos unit went to, I think, the Video Game Museum, and that would have been about 20 years ago. But I didn't know I had the holograms for quite a while. I just turned them up digging through boxes of my stuff one day. And I realized that this was something I didn't need to keep all to myself because they're so cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way I can describe them. Now, there were 8 games released, but I don't think in quantity any more than 2, and that would be Asteroids and Superman. Kurt Van Dale had some Superman. We used to trade them back and forth, and I used that livelihood to sell them off on eBay. Supplies getting low, though, folks. They're going away.
Get them while they're hot.
Yeah, that's right.
So what do you do today? How do you keep busy today, these days?
Well, I live in Fresno. Been married to the girl I knew when I worked at Atari.
What? An Atari love story?
Well, I didn't meet her at Atari.
Oh,
I met
okay.
her going to junior college night classes in 1979. And
Nice.
so she was with me in the thick of the Atari days. She has still some of the T-shirts I designed that highlight the 5200, the Trak-Ball, and the backside is a logo that I laid out on a circuit board table. It says Atari Consumer Electronics Engineering. She was working to get her nursing degree, which she did, and she's worked as a staff nurse and several other nursing incarnations, and then she taught for almost 20 years, and she's just about ready to hang it up. I hung it up about 7 or 8 years ago. So I've spent a lot of time working on coin-op games like pinballs and jukeboxes, and selling Atari stuff and hobnobbing, going to events and shows. Right about now, it's not anybody's fun thing to go to a Atari show because of the COVID-19.
Sure.
But once that clears up, who knows? Maybe somebody's going to want to pay my way to have me come all the way across the country.
You've gone to many shows in the last 15 years. I've kept finding your name in all these different catalogs, and you've given talks, and you put yourself out there.
I've done it. I can't go to all of them anymore, but I would go to like 3 in a row in one locale, and then I'd go to other ones at other locales for several years. My time spent while I was at Atari doing game show tech support numbers about 10, and 8 of those were consumer electronics shows, either Las Vegas or Chicago, and 2 of those were the New York Toy Fair in 1981 and 1983. So I was well traveled. They never did send me to France for SECAM, darn it. I was hoping. Pete Gerard was promoting it. He was trying to get me a free ride to France, but didn't do it. Mais je peux parler de français. I could have gone over there and used that French that I spent 7 years learning, which I never used to go to France.
So you were at Atari for about 4 years total, is that right?
Yeah, 4 and change.
Yeah.
The first 2 were dynamite, and then it was getting scary, but I never regret it.
What haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
Tall tales, some of them mostly true. It was Super Bowl Sunday, I think 1982, because we were still in the original lab. And there were no staff members in other departments that we saw, but we commandeered our engineering lab in the upstairs and daisy-chained every television we could manage to, so that we had the Super Bowl playing everywhere you went in all the different labs, and brought in barbecued ribs, tequila, and a keg of beer, and partied like maniacs in the upstairs engineering lab. And nobody came by and said, "What the hell are you doing? Get out of there." Some of us were out of control, running down the halls, even filling up buckets with recycled beer. And most of the things that we did there smack a little bit of Animal House, but there was nothing we ever got caught for and called on the carpet and were disciplined, you might say, because there was a very interesting underground lack of discipline that we got away with. We used to call our group the BTS, the Belligerent Tech Society, because things that we got a finger wag about were probably lame and tame, but while you're doing it, you're figuring, yes, this could be something I get in trouble for. We had a inflatable frog that we got in Chicago one summer night, and we inflated him with helium and tethered a couple of helium-filled weather balloons to him and flew him off the roof, which was not exactly the kind of thing that the engineering chief guy would like, because he was French, and that's one of the nicknames for French people is frogs.
Sure.
And somebody might have gotten review thrown out, but I got away with it. I didn't stick my head up so high.
I don't think that corporate life is like that at all anymore. Do you think that it's for the better or for the worse that things have changed so that you can't fly frogs off the roof?
Well, I'm happy that it happened the way it did. And I think there are a lot of things that would be the stuff of movies and would still not tell the tale adequately. The movie that I've seen that seems to best bespeak that kind of atmosphere is the one called Halt and Catch Fire, which is about the PC creation. And there were some parts of it that I thought were stretched, but in general, I thought it was a real hoot. I thought it was well done. They had a lot of characters, nerdish characters, uptight management, a lot of things that reminded me of working at Atari. So if you haven't seen that, or anybody that's listening, it's a 4-season episodic, I think, called Halt and Catch Fire.
All right. Yeah, I keep having it recommended to me, but I have not watched it yet.
Well, if you watch 1 or 2 episodes, you'll get sucked right in.
If you could, I think this is my last question. If you could send a message to the people who are still using their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
I would say it was the best thing that could have happened during that time, and you can get a lot out of them even to this day, and don't go thinking that you got everything out of them. There are so many people that are now dissecting Atari's computer line. I'm not saying the other company products aren't having that done also, but it just has so much momentum. I would not hesitate to recommend anybody that does not have an Atari computer to get one, because there's a lot more information available now than there was when I worked there. And you can find just about anything you want to take the performance level to a new height.
Yes, indeed. Good answer.
Okay, thank you, Kay. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.